Is that fair? Because, of course, Winston has a track record of a certain lack of cooperation with some of the governments over the years he's been involved with, and fallings out.
I think it's actually quite unfair because Winston has spent most of the last 3 or 4 years slinging mud at National. And he made it very clear prior to the election campaign that he would find it very difficult to form a coalition with a government which included Bill English and Stephen Joyce. For him to claim that if only National had been somehow more cooperative with him, he might have thought differently, is, I think, rubbish.
Richard Harman on the panel, thank you. 4 minutes to 5. And then John Campbell on Checkpoint for the last time. And you worked with John for a very long time, didn't you?
I did work with John. He's the best. It'll be sad to see him go, but look forward to seeing him pop up somewhere else.
I don't know if he's in full health tonight, but he's valiantly come in.
I rongo kei te mawiwi. He's sick.
He's going to do a last show and then go home and tuck himself up with a hot toddy. We've been discussing the use of alcohol in New Zealand again this week, with the Port Ahuriri School bowing to DHB pressure and banning alcohol from its food and music festival held on school grounds but well after school on a Friday. Queenstown Police wanting an end to public gatherings involving booze. Justin Lester, on the other hand, citing craft beer as an example of Wellington's cool image. We've got tons of comments on this. Do you have a comment generally on whether we have a big societally wide problem with alcohol or a problem with a cohort of people who can't drink, and that's actually moving across society, curtailing everyone's freedom?
That's a big question to just chuck at a
Friday?
Yeah. Clearly, a huge number of social issues are because of alcohol. But I drink it socially and I don't do anything bad. I mean, and there'll be a lot of people out there going on, I don't either. So what percentage of the population? I wouldn't have a clue, would you?
No, I don't, but I feel similar to you that I feel, there is a problem with alcohol and the consequences of it when people get too carried away. But at the same time, I feel like, why can't you take a bottle of wine to the park on a Sunday afternoon and sit there?
My family's band travelled around the world playing, and they said in the British culture, along with New Zealand culture and Australian culture, that there was quite a difference in the drunk behaviour of those people compared to other countries in Scandinavia and what have you. And it was just their own anecdotal, evidence that our culture and Anglo-Saxon culture gets more violent and more boisterous, and other cultures can drink. And maybe even to slight excess and not have the same level of violence in it. Now, I've got no evidence to back that up, but that's what they, suggested, playing to different people all around the world at all different levels of...
We have to be better as parents. We have to be better examples for our children.
But taking a bottle of wine to the park on a Sunday afternoon, presumably with children...
Yeah.
Running around, because that was part of the issue at the school.
Not a bottle each.
No, not a bottle each, and none for the children.
Well, yeah.
But nevertheless, when you were a child, would you have noticed if your parents had a bottle of wine at the park on a Sunday afternoon and weren't obviously inebriated? Or...
I wouldn't have noticed.
Well, yeah, my parents drank moderately and it was fine. There was no violence that arose from it, no bad behaviour. Hopefully I've followed suit.
These are discussions that are going to go on and on too in New Zealand, aren't they? Very good. Andrew Clay, thank you.
I'll drink to that.
Mihi nā rangi Forbes.
Ngā mihi nui kia koe. John, haere, I rungi te rangi Māori.
Mā te wā. And thank you, everybody. Have a lovely weekend. We are back with the panel on Monday.
Tō te maira I hoa mai he kōrero kei te haere hei kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Tonight on Checkpoint, Derek Hanley gets a $100,000 payout from the government after his job as the country's first chief technology officer was retracted. Rā Kaikoura locals who haven't been able to live in their homes since the 2016 Kaikoura earthquake learn their fate. An anti-1080 activist threatens to take the Parliamentary Speaker Trevor Mallard to court. Extraordinary scenes in communities north of the US city of Boston as up to 40 homes and businesses catch fire in a series of gas explosions. 2 Russians accused of a nerve agent attack in the UK admit they visited the city where the assault took place, but say they were there as tourists. And the All Blacks gear up for their final home test of the year.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. The government has put a stop to the appointment process for a Chief Technology Officer, despite Derek Hanley already being given the job. The Minister for Government Digital Services, Megan Woods, has halted the recruitment process to reconsider whether the position is actually necessary. Mr Hanley came back from the United States to take up the role, but Ms Woods couldn't say when he was appointed to the job. She says there's merit in having a Chief Technology Officer, but admits things could have been handled better.
What I'm saying is my starting position is I think there still is worth in it. We'll be doing that work. I need to go back to Cabinet by the end of November with a rescoping of the position.
Megan Woods. Derek Hanley will be paid out $100,000, 3 months of the 1-year contract for services and $7,500 for any set-up expenses. An anti-1080 activist is threatening to take the Parliamentary Speaker Trevor Mallard to court over comments that dead native birds laid on the steps of Parliament appear to have been bludgeoned. At a news conference yesterday, Mr Mallard said he'd been briefed that the birds had died as a result of blood-forced trauma. But Alan Gurdon says that statement is slanderous and he'll be taking Mr Mallard to court for defamation. He says there's no way the birds could have been bludgeoned.
Trevor Mallard has made an absolutely false and ludicrously untrue statement in saying they were bludgeoned. Now, we took photographs and footage of those birds. None of them appeared bludgeoned to me.
Alan Gurdon says some of the birds were roadkill while others were picked up from 1080 drop zones. In a statement after being advised of the defamation threat, Mr Mallard said he would not be bullied but would provide no further comment. The Queenstown Lakes Mayor, Jim Bolt, says he strenuously rejects any allegation he did not fulfil his duties as a director of failed building company Stonewood Homes. Legal papers show the liquidators, Ernst & Young, are accusing Mr Bolt and Stonewood's founder, Brent Metrick, of allowing the company to continue to trade while insolvent and to seeking more than $25 million from them. Timothy Brown reports.
Jim Bolt says he feels unfairly targeted over the collapse of Stonewood Homes. Mr Bolt says as a director he acted on what he understood to be reliable information and advice, and he believed there was a reasonable chance the group would trade successfully through their financial difficulties. The liquidators claim the group traded recklessly from at least March the 31st, 2015 until it went into receivership in early 2016, owing more than $25 million. They also want Mr Bolt to repay $267,000 of directors' fees they say were unfair. Ko Timothy Brown, tēnei.
Residents of a tiny community north of Kaikoura say there's no way they're moving back to their quake-damaged properties. The Kaikoura District Council forced 5 Rakautara households out of their homes after boulders from a nearby cliff pummeled their properties during the 2016 earthquake. After months of waiting, the council organised a closed-door meeting last night. The residents were given 3 options: move their homes away from the cliff, try to contain the risk from the cliff, or leave the area. One resident, Nolene O'Carroll, says she wants her property red-zoned and to be paid out so they can move on with their lives. But the council's chief executive, Angela Oosthuizen, says the council doesn't have the money to pay every homeowner out. One of the country's leading building product certification companies has been suspended from the Codemark scheme. Officials say Beetle Certification Service of Wellington is not meeting the scheme's accreditation requirements. Beetle has until October the 3rd to sort the issues out and is not allowed to evaluate or certify any new building products in the meantime. It's another blow for Codemark, owned by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. Codemark's certificates for high-rise cladding products were ruled inadequate and suspended a few weeks ago. The head of Beetle, Colin Prowse, declined to comment. A chemical sciences professor says there's a need for all plastic in contact with food to be tested more rigorously. An American study has shown BPA alternatives used in plastic could be just as harmful as BPA itself. The Ministry for Primary Industries is reviewing American research which found additives being used to replace BPA could disrupt hormones in mice. Auckland University professor James Wright says given the potential impact of plastics on human health, there could be a case for the same kind of testing that drug companies have to go through. Researchers for the Education Ministry shows most people respect the work that teachers do, but few young people are interested in the job. Just 16% of 185 14 to 20-year-olds said teaching was the most appealing career option for them. The results have informed a new $900,000 advertising campaign aimed at attracting more people to become teachers. It's 5:05. Sport. The Silver Ferns' new coach, Nolene Taurua, says she's not expecting miracles in the first match since their disastrous Commonwealth Games netball campaign. Only half of the New Zealand team from the Gold Coast Games are part of the Quad Series opener against gold medalists England in Auckland tomorrow afternoon. Taurua has been in the job for just a week and says the side has a long road ahead to get back to their best.
Got to be realistic about where we are at. Performance is key, but also knowing we can't save the world. So we just got to put a product out there that we're actually proud about and that shows a lot of heart and passion, and I think that would be a great start.
Australia play South Africa in the other Quad Series match tomorrow. The All Blacks skipper Kieran Reid says they want to wrap up the Rugby Championship title in 4 games. Reid took the team through their captain's run this afternoon ahead of tomorrow's clash with South Africa in Wellington, and he's confident the All Blacks will secure a bonus point win to defend their title. Blythe Tate, who's back competing at international level for the first time in almost 15 years, is the best placed of the New Zealand eventers after the first day of dressage at the World Equestrian Games in the United States. Tate is 8th in the individual standings, with Sir Mark Todd in 14th spot and New Zealand 5th in the team standings. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a sonic tonic dedicated to social welfare. Dimmer is the Friday Night Live act. Country Life is cleaning up Lake Ellesmere. And our Something for the Weekend is putting the dog ahead of the cart, as opposed to the cart ahead of the horse.
Do you think those two did a deal with Netball New Zealand?
I think the deal actually reached out to a few other depths because Casey Kopo has come back out of retirement. I don't think she would have if Nolene Taurua wasn't the coach.
That's Lately with Karen Hay on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, cloudy periods, a few light showers tomorrow. Western ranges from Auckland to Wellington, including the central high country, also Coromandel. A mix of fine and cloudy periods, patchy drizzle from Taranaki to Kapiti overnight, and the odd shower over the central North Island tomorrow afternoon. The Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine weather. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine, apart from a few areas of cloud morning and night. Babulla, mainly fine. Westland, fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow with late drizzle. Fiordland, often cloudy with occasional rain or drizzle. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It's exactly 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Katrina Baden. Thanks everyone for being with us. Sorry about my voice tonight. It's a bit croaky, but we're delighted to have your company. We begin tonight with the $100,000 payout for the job Derek Handley got and then lost. It was as the country's first Chief Technology Officer, a job the government wanted him to have but is now unable to give him. The problem was that meeting with Claire Curran, which the Minister had organised via Gmail and not recorded in her ministerial diary. That was in February. As we know, last month Derek Handley was offered the job and accepted. Today, here's our political editor, Joe Moyer.
A minister's resigned and more than $100,000 of taxpayers' money has been spent, and still the government doesn't have a Chief Technology Officer. In February, then Government Digital Services Minister Claire Curran met with Derek Handley at her Beehive office to discuss his interest in the vacant role. She failed to record the meeting in her diary after she'd used her personal Gmail account to arrange the catch-up and subsequently failed to record it in a written parliamentary question. That led to Ms Curran losing the portfolio, and after intolerable pressure, she ultimately resigned as a minister altogether. Megan Woods is now in charge of Government Digital Services. She can't say when Mr Handley was offered the role, but admits it doesn't look good.
A minister has resigned over this. Claire, by her own admission, has said that this hasn't been handled in the right way. What we're looking to do now in rescoping the role is draw a line under this and go back and think about how this fits within that wider innovation framework.
Megan Woods has halted the recruitment process to reconsider whether the position is actually necessary.
What I'm saying is my starting position is I think there still is worth in it. We'll be doing that work. I need to go back to Cabinet by the end of November with a rescoping of the position.
In a social media post, Derek Hanley says the decision is deeply disappointing, but given the unnecessary and sustained lack of transparency around the process, it's understandable it has been stopped. He says since he came back from the United States last weekend in time to take up the role, he'll be paid out 3 months' salary as part of his original agreement, plus $7,500 for any set-up expenses. National State Services spokesman Nick Smith describes the government's handling of the appointment as incompetent, with taxpayers left to pick up the tab.
This is a shambles where not only is the taxpayer having to fork out over $100,000 for no good, but the flagship of the coalition government's information technology policy is now in tatters.
Ex-leader David Seymour says the government's shown its utter contempt for taxpayer money by botching the whole process.
Well, there's no question that it's a balls up of indescribable proportions, but the real question is, what was the purpose of setting up yet another quango in the first place? Because if you've got a government that is committed to setting up all these quangos, then, the odd payoff and dismissal is actually just a cost of doing business.
Megan Wood says the government's decision does not reflect on Mr Handley as a candidate. But technology commentator Paul Brislin says regardless of who gets the job in the future, it's been tainted by everything that's happened.
It really has been coloured in everyone's perceptions. There are so many entrenched views, even within the IT industry itself now, as to what should happen, that I suspect we've probably crossed a line, and whoever gets the job, if they were to get it, one of these roles at the moment, is likely to be tainted with the brush.
Mr Brislin says until there's a generation of politicians who are really tech-savvy, it's vital the government has someone advising them. Claire Curran lost her position in Cabinet, including the digital services portfolio, as a direct result of the way in which she dealt with Derek Hanley over the role. Since then, she's returned to the backbench, prompting intense scrutiny of the Prime Minister and her handling of the continued fallout. This payout and debate over whether there will even be a role is just the latest chapter in what's proving to be a distracting headache for the government. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
Checkpoint, of course, requested an interview with the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern about the appointment and the retraction and the whole process. Her office declined. Derek Hanley also declined to be interviewed, referring us to that LinkedIn statement that Joe Moyer was talking about in her story. It's 5:12 We head now to Kaikoura, roughly 20k north of Kaikoura, where people have been waiting to learn whether they'll be able to live in their homes damaged by the 2016 earthquake. We met some of those people in May after the Kaikoura District Council forced them out of their homes due to the risk posed by a nearby cliff that pummeled some of their properties with boulders. Last night, the council organised a sit-down meeting at which homeowners would learn their fate. There, they had 3 options outlined to them by the Kaikoura District Council: move their homes away from the cliff, try and contain the risk from the cliff, or, and I quote, retreat. Our excellent reporter Logan Church was at the meeting, and Logan filed this report.
Nolene O'Carroll and John McIntyre are about to go to their first meeting with the Kaikoura District Council about their quake-damaged property.
You've got a property which you love and you look after and you do everything right, and it's left to rack and ruin, and it's awful to see it. It's horrible.
We first met the couple in May, when they showed us their much-loved home in Rakotara that they lovingly built themselves. During the earthquakes in 2016, huge boulders smashed into their house from the cliff above as they slept. They wondered if they would die, but in the horror of that moment, they had no idea almost 2 years on, they would still not be allowed to return to the house due to the council slapping a Section 124 notice on the door.
We can't carry on living like this in limbo and have our properties ruined. They're deteriorating. We try and protect them, and people come along and take down the barriers. Council would not help us in any way or form to protect our property. We wanted them to fence the areas off, and they wouldn't do that. They haven't helped us one bit, so we just want it finished with now.
In the meantime, their house is falling to pieces. The garden is overgrown, the giant boulder that smashed through their kitchen is still there, Barriers they put up to cover the property have been smashed. Even the bright red Section 124 notice is now covered with cobwebs. Is that cliff safe?
No.
When we spoke to them in May, John and Nolene wanted their home red zoned and gone. That wish stays the same. What correspondence have you guys had with the council since May and now?
Possibly 2 letters, just outlining the procedure of what they were going to do in the big plan, not specifically just with us, but for everybody, and that's about it. And here we are.
Are you happy with that?
No, I've never been happy with the communication from council. It's not been enough. So let's hope they can turn a corner.
Earlier this year, the council received $1.5 million from the government to solve the land hazard issue. 15 properties like John and Nolene's across the entire district are in a similar boat. The council promised it would return to the owners with options in September. September is here. But before we go into the council meeting, let's rewind 24 hours and travel to Kaikoura.
The aftershocks have substantially dropped away, and there's been 2 or 3 very heavy rainstorms that have come through that have, I guess, challenged the slopes.
That's GNS scientist John Scott, who has been contracted by the council to assess land hazards such as the Rugby cliff.
The feeling is that the slopes have been tested, and things are settling back down to what might have been before the Kaikoura earthquake.
What do you mean the feeling is? I mean, you can't judge someone's life off a feeling. What do you, and you know, for these people it was a case of life or death because many thought they were going to die during the earthquake. What does a feeling mean?
It's really scientific judgment, really, based on experience when you look at the facts on the site.
The cliff itself is about the height of a small city high-rise. Several houses in the settlement are built right up against it. Large boulders can be seen at the top, held in place by trees, vegetation, and the earth. But, of course, we know the earth can move. So does John Scott think the cliff is safe?
No call's been made on that yet. We're still considering all the evidence and the new science.
So you can't say if it's safe or not yet?
Not yet, no.
So after several months of GNS work and this new science, no words as to whether this cliff is safe. We are waiting for a final report. As we heard earlier, a strong criticism of the council throughout this saga is a lack of communication and understanding of the residents' positions. A letter sent from Kaikoura Council's Chief Executive, Angela Oosthuizen, to Nolene O'Carroll last month, said the risk had reduced significantly across the region. This means many property owners may soon be able to return to their homes. I asked Ms Oosthuizen how many of the Rugby 5 wanted to go back.
We're still to go through that process of actually talking to them and identifying it formally on the record. I do understand there are a few property owners that are concerned with the risks, and that's what the next couple of days are all about, is really to talk to those people, to find out how they're feeling, to find out what their circumstances are, and to marry that up with the new information that's come to light so that we can get to appropriate outcomes at the end.
But these property owners were saying months ago that they didn't want to go back there, so why is the council only discovering this now?
They have said that, and as I said before, it is a complex process.
If you are watching, the person sitting on the right is Deputy Mayor Julie Howden. She was in the building at the same time and asked to sit in on Angela's interview. Can you explain to me what's complex about this? To the residents' minds, and to my mind, to be honest, it boils down to the simple question of, is that cliff safe? So what's complicated about this?
What's complicated is that there are individual circumstances. In each case, you've got to work through how has the new information affected what the outcome is going to be. We've got to take circumstances into account. I believe that they should have faith in the process. Unfortunately, as I said, the process does take time. It is complex. There's a lot of risks and policy decisions that we have to make. I believe we're significantly down the track in terms of getting to that point. We're fairly close to getting to some solutions towards the end of the year, and I would ask them for a bit of patience and a bit of tolerance to enable us to work through and to get to that point.
A tall ask for people who have already been waiting for almost 2 years. Let's return to Christchurch and head into the meeting at the Canterbury Regional Council for this long-awaited sit-down. We agreed not to record or film inside the meeting room. On one side of the boardroom table sat Angela Oosthuizen and John Scott, as well as Kaikoura's Mayor Winston Gray. Around them, 3 sets of fed-up residents, 2 more on the phone and on Skype. You could cut the tension with a knife. Angela Oosthuizen outlines 3 options: move the homes away from the cliff, try and contain the risk from the cliff, or retreat. The first, move the homes, is vehemently opposed. In some cases it is not possible due to the rail line on the other side of the land. Nolan asked the council to sign an affidavit saying the cliff was safe. They said they couldn't. The second option, contain the hazard, is also unlikely. That hillside is too big, too unstable, too dangerous. The third, leave the site, receives unanimous approval. No one wants to live there again after the hell they went through. But the council made it clear red zoning was not an option, and it didn't have the money to pay everyone out. Some suggested the government should fork out more than the proposed $1.5 million for the 15 affected houses across the district, calling that stingy. The council promised to relay that to the government. Fast forward about an hour until after the meeting.
Oh, I really don't know. I don't really think they have any answers just yet. I seem to be waiting for another report, another geotech report. I don't know. Angela did say that she felt very sorry for us, and we are in a very hard place. So I don't know, Logan. I'm not sure.
The council says it will make a decision as to what to do by the end of the year, but that is of little comfort for Nolene and John, who have since relocated to Christchurch. Their Rakotara home will continue to deteriorate and slowly fall to pieces. The only thing that has stayed the same is that bright red, cobweb-covered Section 124 notice. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ahi nei, ko Logan Church tēnei.
I know this isn't the RNZ way, but it's my last night, so we're throwing the rule book out a little bit. I just want to remind people that Logan Church is about 1 year out of broadcasting school, and he is filing the most extraordinary, sophisticated, nuanced and rigorous work, and he shoots and edits it himself, and he is part of a team of young reporters who've arrived at RNZ in the past 2 or 3 years who really are exciting, and I really look forward to listening to their work, wonderful work from Logan and so many others of the youngsters who've appeared since, the last couple of years. Right, let's move on. There have been extraordinary scenes in communities north of the US city of Boston. Up to 40 homes and businesses have caught fire after a series of gas explosions tore through the towns of Andover, Lawrence and North Andover. 1 person has been killed and at least 12 injured. Hundreds of residents have been evacuated. With more, here's the BBC's Olivia Crellin.
Flattened and up in smoke. Homes from 3 communities north of the US city of Boston, destroyed in the wake of an apparent natural gas pipeline rupture. A total of 70 fires, explosions or investigations of gas were reported. Local authorities responded, evacuating hundreds, and some 50 fire departments rushed to the scene. With the cause of the blast still unclear, the Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker said safety and shelter were the first priority.
There'll be plenty of time later tonight, tomorrow morning, and into the next day to do some of the work around determining exactly what happened and why and what needs to be done to deal with that. But the focus in the short term is to make sure that we do everything we can to provide shelter for people who need shelter.
At least 1 person has died and 12 have been injured. Investigators suspect overpressurization of a gas main led to the series of blasts and fires. The Columbia Gas Company, who supply gas to the area, say it is investigating what has happened. Earlier that day, it had said it would be upgrading gas lines in neighbourhoods across the state, but it's not clear if this was one of the locations where work was planned. With residents supplied by the company unable to return to their homes and many in the dark about the state of their properties, it may take days to work out what has happened here and weeks for those affected to return.
That's the BBC's Olivia Crellin. It's 24 minutes past 5. New research has shown that substances for the much maligned bisphenol A in plastic may be just as harmful as BPA itself. The chemical is found in plastics used to make everything from food containers and bottles to coatings in tin cans. The government says it's reviewing the findings, but its current advice is that the potential consumption of these additives in New Zealand do not pose a health risk. So what's going on here? Anusha Bradley reports.
Nearly 2 decades ago, Washington State University researchers found the chemical BPA, used to stiffen plastic, could disrupt hormones in animals. In recent years, similar studies also reached the same conclusion, and responding to consumer demand, plastic manufacturers started producing BPA-free consumer items. But now another study by the same university finds these BPA alternatives could be just as bad, in mice at least. A chemical and materials engineering lecturer at Auckland University, Dr. Alison Ndoma, says very few plastics contain BPA alternatives. But those that do should not be used if they show signs of damage or ageing.
Any plastic number 7 in particular, if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, those plastics are perfectly fine to keep no matter how degraded they get. Even when they discolor, they're still safe for you.
The Ministry for Primary Industries is responsible for monitoring packaging chemicals in New Zealand. It will consider the findings of this latest study, but says its current advice, confirmed through surveys of New Zealand foods, is the same. And that is the potential levels of migration of BPA and phthalates in the New Zealand diet are not a health risk. These plastic lovers on the streets of Napier this afternoon weren't concerned about the latest finding that says otherwise.
So I've worked in the plastic industry for 30 years. We developed the plastic probably about 16 years ago. It was made out of cornstarch. It's biodegradable, and the public at the time and the customers at the time reverted back to the old cheap plastic because they didn't think it was worth it.
I actually have no idea about it, so I've never thought about it.
I have seen occasionally things, don't ask me when, maybe in the supermarket that says PBA free.
That's the one. So have you bought those?
No.
So it doesn't worry you that these containers might be just as bad for you?
No, not until I hear the evidence.
But others were a bit worried.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely making some moves to try reduce my plastic consumption. Trying to use some glass and things like that.
Is that because of the health risks?
Mainly environmental, but yeah, bit of both.
Yeah, that does concern me. You know, you'd think of today's technology, maybe they could come up with something better.
MPI says New Zealand manufacturers are required under the Australia-New Zealand Food Standards Code to ensure food in contact with packaging is safe. The onus is therefore on manufacturers to ensure that alternatives to BPA and food contact materials do not present a health concern. Auckland University Chemical Science Professor James Wright believes a better testing regime is needed for all plastics that come into contact with food.
You know, you could liken it a little bit to the pharmaceutical industry if you look carefully at the sort of hurdles that a compound has to jump through to become acceptable as a pharmaceutical. The studies are enormous. They cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And yet some of these compounds that we're exposing ourselves to from these plastics, they haven't been put through those same sorts of tests.
But Professor Wright says that would be costly, and with most of the plastics in New Zealand produced overseas, would also require cooperation on international standards. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
The British government has described a Russian television interview by the 2 suspects in the Salisbury nerve agent attack as full of lies and blatant fabrications. Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Boshirov insisted they were not intelligence officers but businessmen who'd gone on a trip to visit Salisbury Cathedral. Britain alleges they poisoned the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter with the military-grade nerve agent Novichok. Months later, a local woman, Dawn Sturgis, died after randomly coming into contact with the poison. Such an extraordinary story, this one. The BBC's Sarah Rainsford is in Moscow and has this report.
Speaking out for the first time, the 2 Russians accused of the deadly nerve agent attack in Salisbury. Today, they appeared on pro-Kremlin television to declare their innocence.
Our friends have been suggesting for quite a long time that we visit this wonderful city.
They do resemble the two men identified by British police, but they deny they're Russian intelligence agents. Asked what they were doing in Salisbury, they came up with this.
It's a tourist city. They have a famous cathedral there, Salisbury Cathedral. It's famous throughout Europe, and in fact throughout the world, I think. It's famous for its 123-meter spire. It's famous for its clock. It's the oldest working clock in the world.
The men claim they were so keen to see the sights, they made 2 trips here in 2 days. The weather was so bad, they came back. British police believe the first visit was actually a recce for the attack. So did they visit the house where Sergei Skripal and his daughter were poisoned?
Maybe we passed it or maybe we didn't. I'd never heard about them before this nightmare started. I'd never heard this name before. I didn't know anything about them.
From the very start, the Kremlin has dismissed the accusations coming from London as lies. Officials here have called the whole affair absurd, a soap opera. Now, these 2 men are being presented as definitive proof of that, however implausible their own story actually sounds. The Skripals survived the poisoning, but Dawn Sturgis died after spraying Novichok from a perfume bottle her boyfriend had found. Police believe that's how the nerve agent was brought to Britain.
When you go through customs, they check all your belongings. So if we had anything suspicious, any police officer would have questions. Why would a man have women's perfume in his luggage?
Accused by Britain, the men now claim they're worried for their lives. They even demand an apology. But this appearance was controlled, carefully choreographed. The suspects have vanished as suddenly as they appeared for the state TV camera.
Youth Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. It's 28.5 minutes to 6. Coming up, northern areas of the Philippines are beginning to feel the initial effects of the super typhoon that is hitting them. The outer bands of Hurricane Florence battered the Carolinas, and an anti-1080 activist threatens to take the parliamentary speaker Trevor Mallard to court. We'd love your feedback. Text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Katrina Batten was communicating via mouth movements.
You weren't supposed to see that.
Silent mouth movements to the studio. Are you good to go, KB, or would you just like me to cough?
No, well, you're going to cough anyway. Just please leave the studio to cough. That would be lovely. And I'll do the headlines.
I'll come back in a minute.
Yes. Please make sure the door is closed before you cough. That would be nice as well. The government has halted tech entrepreneur Derek Hanley's appointment as the country's chief technology officer, even though he had already been given the job. The Minister for Government Digital Services, Megan Woods, says she'll reconsider whether Mr Hanley's position is actually necessary. Mr Hanley and his family came back to New Zealand to take up the position, but Ms Woods could not say when he was appointed. An anti-1080 activist is threatening to take the parliamentary speaker to court over comments that dead native birds laid on the steps of Parliament appear to have been bludgeoned. Trevor Mallard says he had been briefed that the birds had died as a result of blunt force trauma, but Alan Gurdon says that statement is slanderous. He says the photos and footage of the birds he has seen did not seem to suggest they'd been bludgeoned. Wellington's Beetle certification service has been suspended from the Codemark scheme. Officials say the company, which evaluates building products, is not meeting the scheme's accreditation requirements. Beetle has until October the 3rd to sort the issues out and is not allowed to certify any new building products in the meantime. The suspension is another blow for Codemark, which is owned by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. The Mayor of Queenstown Lakes is strongly rejecting accusations that he did not fulfil his duties as a director of the failed building company Stonewood Homes. Legal papers show the liquidators Ernst & Young are accusing Jim Bolt and the firm's founder Brent Metrick of letting the company continue trading despite being insolvent. The liquidators are seeking more than $25 million from Mr Bolt and Mr Metrick. The Education Ministry is launching a $900,000 campaign to attract more teachers after surveying found few young people want to become one. The survey asked 185 young people aged from 14 to 20 what was the most appealing career option, and only 16% said teaching. That's the news. I'll be back at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Madison Reedy on the other side of me. Hi, Madison.
Hello.
10 years since the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis, global financial crisis. What's changed?
Well, not much, as we found out. Some regulators have added in some, obviously some extra measures there, but I would like people to remember as they're sipping their coffee, looking at the beautiful Saturday morning sunrise across the country, that tomorrow marks the day, 10 years on, that the Lehman Brothers Global Investment Bank crashed. It's when it announced it went bankrupt, and that was the marker of the great financial crisis all over the world.
And the rapacious, greedy and cynical behaviour that led to a lot of that stuff and led to so many people being overexposed.
Exactly, and it was overexposure to the housing market that led to that. So obviously most of the changes that have come in have tried to prevent that again. So if people don't remember, what happened there was that banks gave out all of these subprime mortgages that were called CDOs, collateral debt. What were they called? Collateral debt obligations, CDOs. They were subprime mortgages made up of essentially crap. And then you also had those corrupt credit agencies that were getting paid by these banks, giving them AAA ratings, saying that they were good, so people kept buying them. The problem is these subprime mortgages were sold to people who couldn't service them. Some of them were actually called ninjas, the people who bought them. So they had no income, no jobs and no assets.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Looking back, it is wildly, wildly crazy. And how it even happened.
Crazy is benign and it's cynical.
Absolutely. And then you come to now and you know, 10 years on, say, what's changed? What have we done? Could such a thing ever happen again? And if you don't remember as well, the Financial Markets Authority, which is our version of what they had in the States, the Securities Exchange Commission, which was found to be very corrupt. It turned a blind eye, knew what was happening, you know, didn't really care there. And so we obviously have the FMA now, also the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. Its job is to be the regulator and the watchdog of our banks. And I spoke to the Prudential supervisor, his name's Toby Fines. I spoke to him yesterday and said, look, what's changed? How are we doing? What are we doing to make sure that our banks will not go insolvent from such things again? And he told me that that they actually have some new measures now, one including which has been recently adapted. It's called a dashboard, and it's on the Reserve Bank website. Anyone can go and look at it. It has all of the risk kind of assessments and all of the liquidity and kind of solvency data of every single bank in New Zealand, and it compares them to each other. So what that does is it certainly keeps them on their toes, because when banks are put next to each other, they certainly want to look good. So that's certainly a measure that is increasing transparency, because that's something that, you know, people didn't know, which is what led to the great financial crisis too.
Gosh, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Absolutely,
looking back,
yeah. Especially looking back at the unemployment stats as well. I mean, 2.6 million jobs lost in the United States alone, 250,000 just across the ditch in Australia.
And then you can make it really staggering by looking at how many people responsible for this behaviour went to jail, and the number is hardly any, if any.
Exactly.
Unbelievable.
And then you also
What's Bob Dylan say? Steal a little and they throw you in jail, steal a lot and they make you king? You've never even heard of Bob Dylan, have you, Madison?
I have. No, I certainly have. You've thrown other names at me before, but I do know that one.
Right, an economist claims the energy sector is making too much money. How did they come to that conclusion? And this is off the back of the
electricity price review panel report that we had earlier this week, and within that they found that the energy sector, the companies that generate and sell our electricity in New Zealand, weren't making excessive profits despite, you know, charging consumers a hell of a lot for it. So one economist took on this task too in light of that report, and he compared looking at what traders within generation firms, how much they pay for wholesale power and then how much they sell it for. He compared that and found that there was a difference of about $5.4 billion over 7 years. So he's come out today saying that proves the industry needs more competition and needs a redesign.
How did the markets finish the week, Madison?
We finished up 0.2%. That's 22 points to 9,270. New Zealand dollars buying at 65.9 US cents, 91.5 Australian and 50.2 British pence. And I'd just like to say, John, it has been a pleasure doing business with you.
Well, it's been a pleasure doing business with you, and you're a very welcome addition to the RNZ business team.
Thank you very much. And I don't think I've ever told you before, but you were the reason I became a journalist.
Well, it's a lovely thing to tell me.
So sharing a studio with you has been fabulous.
Well,
Go
thanks,
well.
Madison. Yeah, you too. It's a pleasure having you here. Northern areas of the Philippines are beginning to feel the initial effects of the super typhoon that's hitting them. The Category 5 storm, which is 900 kilometres wide, is barreling towards the northern tip of the main island of Luzon and could impact millions of people. It's gathered strength since it struck Guam and the northern Marianas early this week, where it tore down trees and power lines and left hundreds homeless. This report from the BBC.
Heavy rocks tying down houses in the north in the hope it might save the roofs of their vulnerable homes when Typhoon Mangkhut arrives. The Philippines is hit by about 20 typhoons and storms a year, the destruction killing hundreds and leaving millions in a cycle of poverty. But this super typhoon has been described as the strongest yet of 2018. Schools and offices have been ordered shut, thousands are evacuating. At about 900 kilometres in diameter, the storm is expected to pack powerful wind speeds with heavy rains triggering landslides and flash floods. Storm surges too are a big threat, with high waves likely to inundate the coastline. But the biggest fear is for the estimated 10 million people in the path of the storm, with worries authorities and rescue services will be stretched thin.
But the important thing is for the government to make sure that evacuation happens, that in evacuation centres there's no panic, and that we could provide food, that the government is ready with food.
Officials don't want to see a repeat of Super Typhoon Haiyan, which killed thousands in 2013, affecting millions of people, many forced from their homes. This time, as people prepare and stock up on supplies, some even say they plan to stay in the hope they can protect their property. As Super Typhoon Mangkhut draws ever closer.
Rajid Ahmed reporting. The typhoon is expected to move on to Vietnam, southern China and Hong Kong. Just out of interest, there are currently 9 hurricanes, typhoons or major tropical storms on the planet. 9. It is hurricane season in the Atlantic, but that's a high number even for this time of year. It's 18.5 minutes to 6. Thanks for being with us on Checkpoint. An anti-1080 activist is threatening to take the Parliamentary Speaker, Trevor Mallard, to court over comments that dead native birds laid on the steps of Parliament as part of a protest appeared to have been bludgeoned. Alan Gurdon says the protest was an act of theatre and admits he can't be sure that any of the birds, which were collected from roads and 1080 drop zones, were actually poisoned by 1080. Here's Katie Doyle.
At a press conference yesterday, the Parliamentary Speaker, Trevor Mallard, says he's received expert advice the birds had been bludgeoned to death and has laid a complaint with the police.
I've been briefed today that the birds died from blunt force trauma. There's work that is going on to finally establish that, and that will involve an investigation at Massey University, followed by Landcare Research doing a toxicology check on birds. But the expert advice is that the birds were almost certainly bludgeoned to death.
But anti-1080 protester Alan Gurdon says that's ridiculous, and he plans to sue for slander.
I will definitely be taking him to court for defamation and slander of my character and that of my fellow protesters if he does not talk to Jacinda and make her agree to give me the meeting with a full parliamentary sitting for a full day to give them a presentation of the truth. If they are forthcoming with this meeting that we were promised, then I may reconsider not taking him to court.
Alan Gurdon says there is no way the birds were bludgeoned.
Trevor Mallard has made an absolutely false and ludicrously untrue statement in saying they were bludgeoned. Now, we took photographs and footage of those birds. None of them appeared bludgeoned to me.
Mr Gurdon says some of the birds were roadkill, while others were picked up from a 1080 drop zone in 2014. However, he can't say for sure if they died as a result of 1080.
My acquaintance that kept those animals in his freezer since then was hoping to be able to get a pathology report, or whatever you call it, get them tested for 1080 residues. So he had kept them in his freezer, but he has not had the vast sums of money available to him to be able to get them independent tests.
The Conservation Minister, Eugenie Sage, is sticking by the use of 1080. She says New Zealand is in the grip of a predator crisis, and 1080 is the best weapon the country has got.
1080 is an absolutely critical tool if we want our Indigenous wildlife to survive. We have a predator crisis. It is the safest and most effective way of controlling predators over large areas.
After being advised by RNZ of Mr Gurdon's defamation threat, Mr Mallard said in a statement he's not going to be bullied, but would make no further comment. For Checkpoint in Wellington, Katie Doyle.
Let's stay in Wellington, where the City Council has joined with a private company to completely transform an inner-city office building into apartments. The plan was unveiled today and is part of the council's new renting model. The 35 1 to 3 bedroom apartments are a joint venture between the council and the Wellington company owned by Ian Castles and will be ready for tenants next year. Charlie Drever filed this report.
Freemason House on Wellington's Willis Street is like any other office block built in the 1980s. But work to convert it has already begun, and from mid-2019 it will become the apartment complex Te Kāinga Aroha, home to around 100 tenants. Mayor Justin Lester says the apartments will be affordable, with the central city location making them ideal for middle-income earners.
These properties will rent for approximately $400 up to $700 per week, and there'll be a range of accommodation, 1 bedroom up to 3 bedroom. We want to average that out in a perfect world at about $200 to $260 per person.
The council will lease the building from the Wellington company for 15 years, meaning tenants will likely be able to stay for much longer than the usual 1-year lease. Renters United spokesperson Anna Mooney says that's needed in Wellington's current rental market.
It's very, very tough. So the low supply of rentals, it makes it very hard to find a flat. Then once you're in a rental house, it's very hard for renters to be able to assert their rights, because it's so easy for if a tenant complains about any maintenance or anything that's needed at the property, they can lose their house.
Anna Mooney says she is currently looking for a place to rent, and finding a similar property in that price range would be difficult. Wellington City Council says the city is still short of more than 3,000 rentals, but the mayor has a message. Watch this space. For Checkpoint, Charlie Drever.
The outer bands of Hurricane Florence are battering the Carolinas, and some communities are being inundated by a massive storm surge. The hurricane has been downgraded to a Category 1 storm, so it ain't a hurricane any longer as it approaches the coast. But despite that, the warnings continue. The US National Hurricane Centre says the storm surge is life-threatening, and torrential rain over the next few days could cause, their word, catastrophic flooding. The BBC's Chris Buckler has more from Wilmington in North Carolina.
On the edge of the Carolinas, the wind is strengthening and the water is rising. And this is just a taste of what Florence threatens. The hurricane has been making its slow approach from the Atlantic, and if what's been forecast comes true, days of flooding lie ahead.
They're talking about storm surges of maybe 9 feet, and if it stalls like they're saying, we could go through, be going through like 2 high tides. So no, I'm not sure. I'm nervous. I'd be lying if I said different.
The authorities are doing everything they can to emphasize how dangerous it remains.
Don't get complacent. Stay on guard. This is a powerful storm that can kill. Today, the threat becomes a reality.
Home after home lies boarded up here. Families who live in the path of Florence have been listening to those warnings that this storm is likely to threaten both property and lives. In the middle of the afternoon, downtown Wilmington was deserted. Shops abandoned, with sandbags placed optimistically at their doors, and a few people making last-minute efforts to protect their stores.
It didn't feel like a panic, probably until maybe yesterday. For some people, you can just see the look on their faces when you're picking up batteries or last-minute water.
Emergency teams have gathered in towns along the coastline. No one can be sure exactly where we'll feel the full force of Florence, but they fear they will be needed as the storm pushes onto land.
That's the BBC's Chris Buckler. Let's change networks and locations, but not topics. CNN's Martin Savage is riding the storm out in New Bern, North Carolina, and says the conditions are really deteriorating.
Here it's both the battering winds. The winds are quite strong at times. You can hear them howling in the wires above you. You can hear the trees being torn apart above you as well. And then at the same time, it's the wind-driven rain. There are times you can look behind you in the streetlights, and it's like a fog. It's almost like a wall of water that you're staring into. So that is the combination of wind-driven water and also the rain that's falling in tremendous amounts here. So even though this storm has been downgraded, it's not a major hurricane anymore. It is going to be a major problem and potentially a major disaster. Right now, we're still dealing with high winds, dangerous winds, power outages, power lines that can come down, trees that can topple over. It is not a time for people to let down their guard, and certainly not a time for anyone to go out and say, hey, let's see what's going on right now.
CNN's Martin Savage there from North Carolina. It's almost 10 minutes to 6. Let's have some sport. The All Blacks are gearing up for their final home test of the year, and they're determined to make a statement against South Africa in Wellington tomorrow night. While the team's reception has been somewhat muted in the capital compared to last week's fanfare in Nelson, they were playing their first ever test in Nelson, there are still plenty of stories to tug at the heartstrings, as our excellent rugby reporter Joe Porter found out this morning at a game of coin rugby with the All Blacks on Lambton Quay.
You got some tickets, that's awesome. What does it mean to you? Everything. Everything.
Young fan Kobe shed tears of joy after winning tickets to tomorrow's game, her first ever All Blacks match. While Kobe was left speechless, her mum explained just how much it means to her daughter.
Rugby is life for her. It's not about the boys, it's about the game, and yeah, the All Blacks are everything. So this is life-changing for her.
Kobe was determined to go around about 17 times to make sure she got those tickets.
Yep, and every time someone won, she was a little bit gutted inside. But yeah, she's been through a lot this year, so this is huge. I couldn't do it for her, so the least I could do is drive her here and try. Well, she wanted me to get her here at 7 o'clock this morning. That was a no-go, so we got here at about 9, and she's lined up and she's bought her coin rugby table she's built, and she's got her card signed, and it's a bloody good day. So.
And now she's got some tickets.
The elusive, it's all she's ever wanted to do is go to an All Blacks game, and All Blacks is life at our house. If you could see her bedroom, I swear you would know that rugby is life.
And Kobe isn't the only one overjoyed by tickets, with Kate hoping to convince a fellow Taranaki mega fan to join her at the game.
Who do you think you'll take?
I don't know yet. I'm going to ring home and see if anyone from New Plymouth wants to come down.
Oh, that might be fun. Good trip. And I see Bowden Barrett, a Taranaki-born man.
He is a Taranaki-born man. Geordie and Scott, Mwasaki, and then Angus Ta'avale. Would be good if he could get his first cap.
The Whanganui Tara Aroha bringing a smile to All Blacks first five and Taranaki born and bred Bowden Barrett.
Some of the reactions are just priceless, and just shows how much it means to them. Big surprise, and yeah, we can't wait.
So first up, I think you get the young lass from Taranaki who's a big Barrett fan.
Yeah, so she's working on, I think, her grandmother to come down, so I'm sure she'll make it happen.
And then we got young Kobe, who was a little bit overwhelmed when she got tickets, so much so she had to walk out the store in tears of joy.
Absolutely, it was her third round of trying to win it, and she said no to her previous two tries because she was here for one thing only, and that was the tickets.
She has those tickets, and Captain Kieran Reid is confident the All Blacks will put on a show and wrap up the Rugby Championship title in their last home test of the year.
Significant for a number of reasons. I think obviously there's something pretty big at the end of the day if we get it right on Saturday around the Rugby Championship, so that's in our sights, but I think awesome to be playing at home. It's our last game here, so looking forward to doing it in front of our own people. It is a focus of ours to win this championship, and we'd love to do it in the 4 games.
And they should, with the Springboks rank outsiders to cause a boil over at Westpac Stadium. Perhaps that's why there's still tickets to the game. In Whanganui Tara, mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Joe Porter aho.
7 minutes to 6. At night, the homeless in Gisborne have nowhere to go, despite most major centres like Dunedin, New Plymouth and Tauranga having a drop-in night shelter. The city has never had one. That's despite some saying there could be as many as 40 people without a roof, sleeping rough on the streets. The local marae is willing to help, but it's asked for some funding to cover costs. It was a month ago and no one stepped up, so that project has stalled. Our reporter Emma Hatton and visual journalist Rebecca Parsons-King went out on the streets of Gisborne and they filed this report.
On a wet and windy winter's night, Gisborne's homeless are starting to settle in. Mike and Willie, two homeless men, or streeties as they call themselves, are showing us around.
Some are on the building, some are down here, but everyone's all spread out. And this is where they all camp. They all sleep up the top.
Up and over the bridge, music blasts from the C Company Memorial House near the Tairāwhiti Museum, Willie's favourite spot. An attempt, he says, to put him off lingering, although we were unable to establish exactly who was playing the classical tunes.
Oh, it's been going for a few months now. They tried to deter us. They just played one song over and over all night, but we've all stayed hard, me and the bro.
He's also had buckets of water thrown at him to move him along.
Has it ever hit you?
Oh, once it did.
We met the pair through Tim Marshall, who coordinates the Gisborne Men's Centre. He says it's hard to know how many people are homeless in the city. He's heard there's about 15. The council figures say 6. Mike tells me sometimes it's as high as 40. A shelter would help clarify the scale of the problem, and Tim says it would help him get a handle on what might help those who don't have a roof over their head. But he says finding a place is proving difficult.
You know, nobody's been falling over themselves saying, hey, we've got this place for those guys. I have had a conversation with one of the local maraes here who actually did say that they would be in a position, but they really needed some resourcing with it, like to offer their space ongoing, which is fair enough. And so I was actually part of a conversation with some people from government, and it included council representation and district health board and that sort of thing, and so who I thought had some resourcing. And when I went back to say, well, is the marae's up for it, I kind of was silenced, really.
In an email, Gisborne's Mayor Meng Foon says the Salvation Army and local iwi provide emergency accommodation. And he also says the council's been lobbying for more mental health services in the region, which the men might benefit from. But Tim Marshall says these men live day to day. Some nights they might use the shelter, sometimes not. Some are at the stage for counselling, but others aren't. He says keeping it simple is the best place to start.
I don't think it needs to be too complicated. It doesn't need to be... and there's enough, I thought, willing people to volunteer their time. Everybody in this community drives past these guys, see them walking around the streets, they know about the situation. So really it's about motivation and willingness to support and address it. You know, tonight's another cold, wet night, and I just feel for those guys.
Willie says he'd use a night shelter, but he's not holding his breath for one.
Yeah, that would be good if it goes ahead. Like everything seems to be said, but nothing's done. Yeah. So you get the hopes up high, and then just the frustrating parts is, yeah, it just doesn't happen.
For now, though, music and all, he's got his spot.
And it's all good. But it looks like I'm gonna jump in the front tonight.
Because it's a bit wet.
Yeah, and the bro said there's a gale coming, so the rain's just gonna come straight in here.
In Gisborne for Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
And Emma was working with Rebecca Parsons-King, who shot that story. It's 5:55 to 6. It's the end of the road for one of the world's most iconic, favourite, beloved cars. The German car maker Volkswagen has announced it will end production of its famous Beetle next year. It had its roots in Nazi Germany, believe it or not, and then became a symbol of the hippie era. The final model, known as the new Beetle, was first produced in 1997. VW says it's going to focus on family-friendly models and electric power. The BBC's Simon Moore with the story of the Beetle and its demise.
Beatlemania. It's one of the best-selling cars of all time, but now the end of an era.
After an official speech by Hitler, the curtains roll back on Germany's motor show.
It was originally the dream of a despised dictator, but came to symbolise the freewheeling 60s, finding mass fame with the Disney film The Love Bug, and capturing hearts with its cheap price and funky design. The reliability, economy and distinct look of the Beetle ensured its success. But now, as Volkswagen looks towards mass-market electric cars, production is to cease. There will be 2 final edition models costing around $23,000. There's shock on social media. Auto News Europe announced iconic Volkswagen Beetle to become the latest victim of SUV craze. Beetle fan Deezers tweeted, "My first car was a 1999 Volkswagen Beetle I got for my 17th birthday. This is so sad." Driver Gifts lamented Volkswagen to kill the Beetle in 2019 as car sales plunge. And Hillary said, "I should have gotten a Beetle. What's the point of you existing if you don't sell those?" The company admitted the loss of the Beetle after 3 generations and nearly 7 decades would evoke a host of emotions from its many devoted fans. But the company has hinted the model could be revived at some point. Never say never, it teased.
That report from the BBC, a lot of feedback coming in tonight, some of it really wonderful. Thank you. I'm really grateful. And I know it's a tribute to the work of the fantastic Checkpoint team. A bit of feedback about 1082. I may be cynical, but I'm prepared to lay down money that none of the birds and mammals placed on the steps of Parliament yesterday contained any trace of 1080 other than by accident. Thank you so much for your feedback. It's coming up to 6 o'clock, and Katrina's just pointed out that as this is my last show, this is the last pips we're going to listen to.
We're going to enjoy them.
So we're just going to sit here, Katrina, and savour them. Here we go.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten aho. The government is not going to appoint a Chief Technology Officer, despite already offering the job to a New Zealand tech entrepreneur. But it will honour the agreement it had with Derek Handley, who has returned from the United States for the position and is paying him out. Here's political reporter Joe Moyer.
The government has canned the process and will pay Mr Handley $100,000, the equivalent of 3 months of the 1-year contract he was offered, as well as $7,500 for his set-up expenses. Megan Woods, who replaced in battle Claire Curran, is now in charge of government digital services and admits it doesn't look good. She's working on rescoping the Chief Technology Officer position for Cabinet approval in November. But technology commentator Paul Brislin says regardless of who gets the job in the future, it's already been tainted. He says until there's a generation of politicians who are really tech-savvy, it's vital the government has someone advising them. From Parliament, Joe Moyer.
Residents of a tiny community north of Kaikoura say there's no way they are moving back to their quake-damaged properties. The Kaikoura District Council forced 5 Rakautara households out of their homes after boulders from a nearby cliff pummeled their properties during the 2016 earthquake. After months of waiting, the council organised a meeting last night. There, residents had 3 options outlined to them: move their homes away from the cliff, try to contain the risk from it, or leave. One, Nolene O'Carroll, says she wants to be paid out so they can move on with their lives.
You've got a property which you love and you look after and you do everything right, and it's left to rack and ruin, and it's awful to see it. It's horrible.
Nolene O'Carroll. The council says it does not have the money to pay every homeowner out. An anti-1080 activist is threatening to take the parliamentary speaker Trevor Mallard to court over comments that dead native birds laid on the steps of Parliament appear to have been bludgeoned. At a news conference yesterday, Mr Mallard said he'd been briefed that the birds had died as the result of blunt force trauma. But Alan Gurdon says that statement is slanderous and he'll be taking Mr Mallard to court for defamation. Mr Gurdon says there's no way the birds could have been bludgeoned. He says some of the birds were roadkill while others were picked up from 1080 drop zones. In a statement, after being advised of the defamation threat, Mr Mallard said he would not be bullied but would provide no further comment. An interim injunction preventing the Auckland Council from carrying out pest control operations in the Hunua Ranges remains in place following a 2-day Environment Court hearing. The conservation group Friends of Sherwood Trust went to court to try and stop the 1080 poison drop. An interim injunction was granted late last week and there was a 2-day hearing in the Environment Court. The council says the court has reserved its decision until next Friday. The outer edges of Hurricane Florence are bringing a huge storm surge, strong winds and heavy rain to the southeast coast of the United States, despite being downgraded to a Category 1 storm. Some coastal communities in North Carolina are being inundated and power has been cut to almost 100,000 people. The state governor, Roy Cooper, is warning it's just the beginning.
The worst of the storm is not yet here.
But these are the early warnings of the days to come. Surviving this storm will be a test of endurance, teamwork, common sense, and patience.
Roy Cooper says the storm surge is life-threatening and the hurricane will bring up to 8 months of rain to North Carolina over a 2 to 3 day period. Rescue teams and troops are on alert in the northern Philippines for the arrival of Super Typhoon Mangkhut are being felt. The storm has winds of more than 300 kilometres an hour at its centre and is due to hit the northern tip of the island of Luzon tomorrow. The BBC's Howard Johnson is in Kaikoura province and says officials are evacuating thousands of people.
They're telling people to move to neighbours' homes that have got more robust structure. So if you're living in a flimsy shack, move away to a church, to a school or to a neighbour's house. They're appealing to people to take neighbours in to care for them during this windy and rough period. We've also seen today that farmers and fisheries were taking in their harvest and taking in their supplies from their fish farms to make sure that they're not devastated when the winds hit.
Howard Johnson in northern Luzon. New data from Stats NZ reveals more than half of New Zealanders want te reo Māori to be a core subject in primary schools. Data about attitudes to the Māori language has been collected for the first time in the General Social Survey of 2016. 53% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that Māori should be a core subject in primary schools. Stats NZ Senior Manager Jason Atwell says only 6 in 100 New Zealanders say they can speak te reo Māori very well or fairly well. The survey shows support for te reo was the strongest among New Zealanders aged 15 to 44 years. The Education Ministry is launching a $900,000 campaign to attract more teachers after surveying found few young people want to become one. Just 16% of 185 14 to 20-year-olds said teaching was the most appealing career option for them. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
Research for the ministry's campaign found most people value teachers highly, but most youth would rather work in business, IT or the creative industries. It also found parents were split on whether they would encourage their children to become teachers, with some worried the profession was underpaid and overworked. Teachers told researchers they were proud of their work and they make a difference to the lives of children. The results have been published as the ministry begins an advertising campaign as part of its efforts to overcome the teacher shortage. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
The speed limit on a dangerous road north of Wellington will be lowered. The Transport Agency says the section of State Highway 58 will drop from 100 kilometres an hour to 80 between State Highway 2 and Whitby. A senior manager, Mark Owens, says in the past 10 years, 4 people have died and 68 have been injured in almost 200 crashes on the road. It's statistically Wellington's most dangerous road. The speed limit will change on September the 22nd. An elderly woman is in a critical condition after being hit by a reversing car in Palmerston North. The woman was taken to hospital after being hit by a car coming out of a driveway on Grey Street at 11 o'clock this morning. The police have spoken to the driver but would like any witnesses to contact them. It's 7 minutes past 6. Sport, and the Springboks coach Rassie Erasmus believes an upset win over the All Blacks tomorrow night would show his team are genuine contenders at next year's Rugby World Cup. South Africa haven't beaten New Zealand in this country since 2009 and come into the Rugby Championship clash in Wellington as underdogs with losses in 3 of their past 4 matches. Erasmus has no doubt what an upset win would mean for his side.
I think everybody knows that the moment you beat New Zealand in New Zealand, you're back to where you want to be and your planning is probably on track and you can tell yourself, listen, we're really contenders next year at the World Cup. So I think that's pretty much how we see it. That doesn't make it any easier, but that's the fact. You beat New Zealand in New Zealand, life's good.
Meanwhile, Wallabies captain Michael Hooper, it's never going to happen. Meanwhile, Wallabies captain Michael Hooper has been forced out of his side's clash with Argentina on the Gold Coast tomorrow with a hamstring injury and being replaced as skipper by David Pocock. The Czech tennis player Barbara Strakova has dismissed Serena Williams' claim she was the victim of sexism in the US Open as bullshit.
Can you say that on RNZ now, can we?
I just did. So we can. Williams received wide support for her claims of sexism after a series of code violations issued by umpire Carlos Ramos led her to meltdown in the final, which she lost to Japan's Naomi Osaka. However, Strakova has told a Czech sports website she finds it interesting that Williams only behaved as she did when she was losing. She also questioned decisions by the Women's Tennis Association and the United States Tennis Association to leap to Williams' defence. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Dame Louise Casey. After her report into integration in Britain, she became a pin-up for UKIP. Not one of her proudest moments, she says. It's been 100 years since the devastating Spanish flu epidemic. I'll talk to New Zealand-born expert on the tricky virus, Dr. Robert Webster, and Bruce Mahalski on his artworks made of bone and the difference between a collector and a hoarder. That's all coming up tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
She's sounding as well as you are. Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, cloudy periods, a few light showers tomorrow. Western areas from Auckland to Wellington, including the central high country, also Coromandel. A mix of fine and cloudy periods, patchy drizzle from Taranaki to Kapiti overnight, and the odd shower over the central North Island tomorrow afternoon. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine weather. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine apart from a few areas of cloud morning and night. Bulla, mainly fine. Westland, fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow with late drizzle. Fiordland, often cloudy with occasional rain or drizzle, and the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It's 6:10 and you're listening to Checkpoint. And before we go any further tonight, this is the part where John normally takes over. But because this is John's final night at RNZ and he's a bit crook, it's only fitting the rest of the show be about his work. Tonight is Checkpoint with John Campbell's 650th program since its reinvention as a multimedia radio and television program on January the 18th, 2016. John hasn't just been a presenter. He's been a mentor to young reporters across the newsroom, a journalist, a storyteller, a friend, and a valued member of the RNZ newsroom. So John, thank you, good luck, and best wishes from all of us. The next half hour is about you and your work.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Christchurch and its memorial wall, the Canterbury Earthquake National Memorial. It is called, on the banks of the Avon River, just off Oxford Terrace, a short walk from the CBD, which is behind me as I speak to you tonight. 185 people died as a result of the earthquake that happened here 6 years ago today. Their names are cut into the marble beside where we are broadcasting live from tonight. The name I'm touching now, Andrew, Christian, Ross, Craig. You watch the families come along here and they all touch the names of their loved ones. Georgie, what has been the toll of the past 4.5 years? Buying your first home, believing all EQC repairs were completed because that is what you were told, to finding yourself in this position, mortgaged, negative equity, seemingly trapped with a property that has been a disaster.
I was pregnant when we closed on the property, so I now have a 4-year-old son who has never met the laid-back, happy, life-loving person that he should have. My relationship has ended, so it's been a catalyst in the end of my 15-year relationship. We went into this, we had big dreams for the house. It was close to family, it was close to friends, it was a good section, close to the mall. We thought we were buying our future.
4.5 years on, with an earthquake-damaged house worth considerably less money than she still owes on it, a huge repair job required, and an insurer who won't touch it, Georgina Hannafin is here to ask EQC, what's next? This is Sarah Tepania, who comes in and teaches here. We'll hear more from Sarah later. But when home has failed them and school has almost always chucked these children out, Sarah's here to show them
someone cares. Someone cares enough. The system out there has let them down enough. So I'm in here because hopefully I can make a difference. I know that sounds corny. Sorry, it's a bit of a cliche.
But if the cliche is made flesh, then maybe fewer arsons, fewer ags, fewer broken children passing the breakage on. Why are you in here?
Because I offended.
And you don't want to tell me about the offending?
No.
But it's not something you're proud of, obviously.
No.
And how long have you been in here for?
I'm going on my 8th month.
And can you tell me about your background? What was your home like as you were growing up?
My dad was, when I was growing up, my dad used to just be very violent, and he was gambling a lot, and that's kind of what triggered my mind to just getting into trouble and doing what I do now. I don't blame it on him, but that's just how I was taught. That's just how my dad was raising me and my siblings, so that's just how I think now, that it's normal for me to go out and offend. Yeah.
But I have a sense, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that you're hoping for more than that now.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get out and change my life and I want to be a beauty therapist.
A beauty therapist. This is a girl who was repeatedly beaten when she was little.
My dad just used to beat me, my siblings and my mum just for no reason at all, just because he felt like it. He was the one with the power. Yeah.
So violence was what you knew?
Yeah.
And did you become violent?
Yeah, I did.
So you missed out on getting a scholarship to St Cuth's by 2 marks.
Yes, but that's okay.
And you're living in a van.
Yes, it just made me push myself more to do better.
Where do you do your homework? Where do you do your homework? Where do you sit to study? Where did you swap for your tests? Where do you write your essays? Where do you do your reading?
Mum's office.
So your mum's got a job?
Yes.
But it's not enough money for you all to be able to afford a house?
Yeah. Houses are very expensive these days.
Yeah, they are. They're very expensive these days. Lots of people are talking about that, TA. TA, what do you want most of all in the world?
A library.
Are you going to have another go at that scholarship?
Yes.
And how are your brothers and sisters? Are they all happy?
No, they're not happy, but they're okay.
And are they healthy? Do people get colds? Do people get sick when you're sleeping in that van? 8 of you in one van?
Yes, they're all sick. Even I'm sick right now.
Yeah, I can hear you've got a bit of a sniffle.
Yes.
What would you like to tell the Prime Minister about your life? Have you ever thought about that? Do you know John Key? Do you know about him?
Yes.
What?
I actually studied him.
What would you like to say to him about the fact that you live in a van?
Try walking in my shoes. Not actually that easy.
I'm standing in front of some state houses, and if you can't see them, if you're listening on the radio, they really are way past their best. There looks to be a lot of damp, a lot of rot. They really are in very poor condition, but there is a waiting list for these. If you can't get up the waiting list, if you can't get into a state house, you can go private. Now, this is one of the poorest areas in Auckland. This is a neighbourhood where money is really tight, but beside the state houses, there is a property for rent. It's 4 bedrooms, and they've done a little bit of work on it, a lick of paint. It looks like a house the owners might be proud of. But the rent for this, well, I inquired, and you can get it for $580 a week. $580 a week to live here. Now, if you work a 40-hour week at $16 an hour, which is more than the minimum wage, that's $640 gross, and this place is $580. To people listening, I cannot describe. We have just walked across Ken and Denise's front lawn, and we are now standing in ash. And everywhere you look in the foreground is burnt and black and lost, and behind us the house is still standing, and you can hear the wind, and it is just... So that moved the flames so fast.
Yes, yeah, just the fire, we're just loving the supply of oxygen and fuel, and hence the reason why the fire's travelling so far. And we're just concerned that the fire they say they have under control at the moment is going to start up again.
Where's your cancer now?
In the liver. Moved to the liver now. It's prostate cancer, travelled to the liver, called secondary cancer.
So it started in your prostate. You had, and we've talked about it before in Checkpoint, you had this ridiculous delay in your treatment. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we've had the Chief Medical Officer from the Southern DHB admit on Checkpoint that the delay was far too long.
Yep.
And now the cancer's in your liver.
Yep. So it was a difference of basically 8 months that made the difference of it, like it was an enlarging prostate and it just turned into a really great tumour. It is what it is, and we just got to, like I said, we don't want it to happen to anyone else. But I'm down the track now, yes, and there is a claim into ACC, and we want that ticked. We are having trouble living on pittance, yeah.
Because you were the primary breadwinner in your home, right?
Yeah.
And you haven't worked since this happened?
No.
So the economic impact of this, so not only have you got secondary cancer, which is in your liver, as a result of this delay in treatment, you also have had a substantial hit to your household income.
Oh, we've used up all our savings and holiday pays, and everything's gone, so you basically are in a situation to run your house. You can't even put petrol in the car to go for a drive. So, you just got enough to pay the bills for the house and get a bit of food.
Oh, my goodness. There's a whole bunch of tears on this carry-on.
The other thing I thought your letter did that was extraordinary is that not only did it give your mum and dad an identity and make them real and vivid and whole and loved, you also had the extraordinary generosity to give Ross Bremner an identity. What made you want to do that?
Well, I'd seen, I've met with the Bremners and I had seen them in person. What I wanted it to be was, he was a real person. So was his mum, and so was Keith. And I guess I wanted that to be seen by the people. It's not, the person that murdered my parents or the person that, did what he did. He was a person that had an illness. And, I just wanted people to know that that's where we were coming at it from. He had an illness. We weren't angry at him. We weren't angry at the family. We just wanted to express that, we were at a loss as well.
Collecting, sorting and processing these mostly donated items is big work. Nationwide, SaveMart is a relatively large employer. But where were the staff I'd been speaking to? So this is a very bizarre experience. We phoned this morning and asked if we could come out and talk to the workers, and we have been able to talk to some of the workers. But we understand the union members have been segregated and are working in another part of this facility. Clearly, we don't just want to talk to a hand-picked sample of workers. We want to talk to all the workers and have free range as we thought we were getting. So I went to the local on-site manager. She called Tom Doonan and asked for permission for us to go and talk to the rest of the workers, the ones who aren't here, and that has been declined. So what was presented to us as an opportunity to come and talk free and frankly to the workforce is simply not that at all. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people working here. There are, we understand, a larger number working next door, but we're not allowed access to them. And I can't really see the point of having let us in these circumstances. Either we can talk to the workforce or we can't.
It switches everything off. Ultimately, it switched off internal organs for my son, and he died. His heart stopped beating and he became increasingly addicted. It's such an addictive drug.
And everyone was aware.
Everyone was aware.
And you talked to him about it. He talked to you about it, didn't he?
we talked openly about it. He was a very honest kid.
And you desperately tried to get him into some form of rehab, right?
Yes, we did. So he was on the waiting list for 8 months. On the week he died, he was at the top of the waiting list. It was too long. I continuously got people telling me there's just no beds, there aren't any beds.
So he was a formally diagnosed schizophrenic, receiving treatment for a schizophrenic.
Yes.
He and you and everyone were
And
totally
his doctors.
open about his addiction to synthetics. And he was on a waiting list for 8 months. And at the end of the 8 months, he died.
Yes. It's not good enough.
So they drive your vans, although they've paid for the vans themselves. They have courier post on the side, although they've paid for it to be there themselves. They wear a courier post uniform, although they've paid for that themselves. They're not allowed to do deliveries independently for other courier companies. These people are employees, aren't they? They're not independent contractors at all. They are in a 100% master-servant relationship with courier post, aren't they?
We have partnership agreements with our partners, John, not employment agreements.
Look, you're using the English language there, and I understand you're giving me words, but I want you to tell me in what way these people aren't in a master-servant relationship with New Zealand Post. They wear your uniform, they drive your van, they can only work for you, they are required to turn up at 5 o'clock in the morning for the most part. They are paid by you. In what way are they not employees?
Every one of our partners gets to choose how they do their job each day. And it's important to us that there's flexibility.
But sorry to interrupt, Mark, and I really appreciate you fronting, and I want to say on the record as we speak that your competitors in the private sector are not fronting. You are an SOE and you're fronting. You say they get to choose. No, they don't. It's all or nothing. Their relationship as courier drivers is an all or nothing relationship with Courier Post. They don't get to choose. And that makes them employees, surely, doesn't it?
We have partnership agreements that work for both parties, John.
And we took action, which included telling Ruru to stop that practice.
Stop the practice of using a seclusion room, Minister.
Well, stop the practice of putting a child into those kinds of premises and for whatever duration or whatever time. My point is we took action on that investigation in terms of the recommendations made by the independent reviewer.
Except seclusion rooms, as we know from Miramar and other schools that have yet to be identified, were still being used until very, very recently. And you know, people just turned their backs on this practice, didn't they? I mean, people, and now it's had daylight. Everyone is saying, no good, it has to stop. A qualified mea culpa, yes, we need to intervene and end this. But in fact, the ministry has known about it, your office has known about it. A lot of people have known about this for the best part of 2 years.
So if I could say again, the complaint was made, an investigation was done to establish the facts, recommendations were made, and we acted on the recommendations.
In the images that they did see from the 15th of March, there was the robot. It was in what was referred to as the airlock, and it did feature mines rescue staff wearing protective equipment similar to what you've just described.
Yeah, looking in a container, looking like they're standing in a container of some description, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Some of those images were released.
Absolutely, but they weren't out in the drift. They weren't out in the drift. Now, look, you have worked your way up through the ranks, and you know from cross-examining people, sometimes it's the stuff you don't say that is as material as the stuff you do say. I just don't understand why you didn't show the families a man in the drift.
Well, from the point of view of the police, we, as I say, had been very transparent and very engaged with and meeting the expectations of the family. At the time when those images were available, bearing in mind that it was after a period after we'd handed over the ownership of the mine, the team that was stepping the families through the process of preparing them for the Commission of Inquiry and making sure that they were across as much of the detail as was reasonable to be across, that was the images that were shown. So I can't put myself back.
Take these broken wings and learn to fly again, learn to live so free. When we
Just the other day, our colleagues at Stuff told a story about a woman in Levin who's transplanting wings onto monarch butterflies. Linda Archer, her name is. Our boss Pip noticed it and we gave Linda a call. Now, from time to time, and this is more Kim Hill's domain than ours, we're in the news business, sadly, not the metaphysics and meaning business, we talk to someone who's animated by something, alive with the love of what they do. And Linda Archer, by golly, is one of them. We'd play the whole interview, but it went on even longer than Morning Report gives to politicians. So this is the story of Linda Archer and her butterflies.
They're just gorgeous, aren't they? They're like jewellery.
Yeah, they are.
You know, they're just amazing.
That grab, which is what we call bits of interviews cut into stories, was 5 seconds long. We got jewellery, we got amazing, and we were only just beginning.
Oh, look, I was just besotted with them.
And in a way, this isn't a transplant story, it's a love story.
And I decided that I was going to breed the monarch butterflies in this conservatory.
We're in Levin here, which has had a big news week with the petrol price story.
And I did over 120 butterflies in that conservatory.
We phoned Linda on Wednesday.
And I was just besotted with them.
That's the second besotted. We haven't just repeated the first one.
They are just stunning.
Well, I can't recall the last time I learnt so much from a single interview, Charlie. How to cook crab, what the icebergs are up to, and the geographical makeup of your beautiful part of the world, and sociological and anthropological. But bloody hell, Charlie, you should be on Radio New Zealand more often.
Well, you know something, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I hope that, that your listeners will get something from this conversation, and feel free at any time to call, or by all means, come to Newfoundland. We'd love to see you.
Charlie Dunn, what a delight. This is public radio. The Radio New Zealand is the equivalent of the BBC, 100% state-funded, non-commercial.
Yeah.
But we've been charged with dragging it somewhat into the 21st century. About 90% of our audience still listens. Brilliant. Genius. It was, in fact, a documentary.
It was,
wasn't a comedy at all.
Totally.
Yeah, brilliant. Right, sorry, everyone.
Net service weather to midnight tomorrow. Shut up, John.
Yeah, look, I can't continue this conversation if your jeans aren't pulled up, Jeff. Are they up?
Yep, they're absolutely, totally up.
It's
Yeah.
it's very important on Radio New Zealand. We say no to crack, Jeff. Yeah, I reckon if you're going to go into the business of importing $500 million worth of pea, you want to be a little bit better at it than this, don't you?
Oh, you want to think think it out properly first to make sure it's going to work. Well, they got most of it right.
Shit, you're a classic, Brian. Oh, God, that's made my day talking to you. Thank you, you good bugger.
Hi, John.
Hello, what am I calling you?
You're calling me Samantha today.
Samantha. Okay, well, I'd like you to call me.
Giles.
I'd like you to call me something else. I'd like to be D'Artagnan today.
Okay, D'Artagnan.
Thanks very much. That's exciting. Thank you, sir. I'm looking really scruffy today. I just couldn't be having a shave, making an effort. I need a haircut. Thanks, you lovely man.
He says if you keep talking it down, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Don't talk yourselves into a funk, because that's not good for anybody.
Smoke that like a mother. Obviously, we can't put that bit to ear. That's great, Jane.
Kia ora, John. Tēnā koe mō tō mahi runga I te pauka whakata. Ai. Kia ora, brother.
John, you've done a fabulous job on RNZ. We listen most evenings, funnily enough, to your show. I hope you have a great career at TVNZ. Who was it?
John Campbell.
So he's finished?
Yeah, he's gone to TVNZ.
Oh, is he? Cheers, John. John Campbell. Appreciate the work you've done for us Aucklanders. Cheers, man.
Who's John Campbell?
Hi, John. All the best in your new role. We've followed you over your career. We think you're fantastic. You're a great journalist, and we look forward to seeing more from you in the future. All the best.
Hey, John Campbell. I've met you a few times and I think you're an awesome guy, and it's a real shame that you're going.
Hey John, thanks very much for all your service. We'll be missed. Love you loads.
Kia ora, John, my bro. It's been awesome seeing you over the last couple of years, bro. You've been an inspiration for a lot of Māori and New Zealand people alike. I wish you all the best on your journeys, bro. Stay safe and never forget about us, bro. Cheer.
La 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 la. Now that I'm moving to level 2, you say you wanna start something new. Well, it's breaking our hearts you're leaving our screens in the evening. You waved the white flag when you came from TV, then dragged us into Millennium 3. Now is it true you're gonna cheat on us with Hillary? Oh, JC, baby, you are marvelous. It's hard to get by without you on the show. Oh, JC, baby, you are marvelous. I'll always remember you saying thank you so much. You've seen a lot from behind that desk. You never seem to take a rest. With your top button up, you're so finely dressed. We're real impressed. Make sure you come back and work with us again. We know how much you love us lovely men. Who knows, we might have got through to Jerry Brownlee by then. Oh, JC, baby, you are marvelous. It's hard to get by without you on the show. Oh, JC, baby, you are marvelous. I'll always remember you saying thank you so much. La 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 la. Oh, JC, we'll miss you. It won't be the same after you leave, 'cause we'll turn the aircon up 5 degrees. And just remember not to steal our producers, please. Please. Oh, JC, baby, you are marvelous. It's hard to get by without you on the show. Oh, JC, baby, you are marvelous. I'll always remember you saying thank you so much. Thanks, John.
Tonight is my last night hosting Checkpoint. My initial replacement will be Alex Perrottet, who was singing that song. He's a lovely man, Alex. And then Lisa Owen, two fine journalists and broadcasters. The program will be in beautiful hands. But Checkpoint is made by a team. It's an RNZ news production with the resources of the entire news operation to call on, from Otago Southland to the far north, with fine reporters and bureaus and many places in between. I want to thank them all for their work and say one of the privileges of being at RNZ has been working with the increasing number of young reporters here. There's a few of them out in the Auckland newsroom now, and I'm so excited about what they're going to do for this organisation. The program itself has a permanent staff of 7. Pip Keane, our executive producer, who's sitting to my left now, Catherine Warbridge, who's sitting along the wall from Pip, our associate producer, Bridget Burke, our story and interview producer, Michelle Cook, who's behind Bridget, our digital producer, Zach Fleming, our reporter who's behind me here, Calvin Samuel, our beautiful director, and Nick Monroe, our cameraman, who's at the back. Also, we have a roster of sound recorders led by Jeremy Ansell, who's on tonight. I think this is the second or third time you've presided over my departure from RNZ, Jeremy. And Rangi Powick, Yana Witter, Blair Stagpool, and Jeremy Veal. They're all great. They all really give a damn. Also in the studio tonight is Francis, who's somewhere down the back, and Claire, who is our head of CamSec. Hey, you're the boss cameraman, aren't you, Claire? And Claire was involved, you were involved when we were setting this up, and we were all building this program, right, and rehearsing ad infinitum over and over, which was when, the end of 2015? Yeah. Anyway, they're a fantastic team, and they'll continue to give a damn and work hard and make radio that matters for an audience that deserves that respect. Checkpoint is over 50 years old. I look forward to being here for as much of the next 50 years as possible to listen to it, and I want to end by thanking the team in the room around me here who've worked so hard and cared so much and given such a damn and made a program it's been my immense good fortune to host. I can't thank you enough. God, it's been a pleasure and a privilege, and I'll miss you all, although not the cake. Thank you for listening. Kia ora, rawa atu, nā manakitanga, ka kite anō.
RNZ News headlines it's at about 22 minutes to 8 now. I'll just give you a little bit of feedback that has come in since then before we go to headlines. I bloody love you, John J. Campbell. Thanks for everything, and especially keeping your eye on Christchurch when it was forgotten by others. Anna. Au revoir, John. Thank you for your journalistic integrity and humanity. Take a good rest before your next assignment. I shall miss you. Ruth in Christchurch. John, love your passion and integrity for all the needs in society that need putting right. I shall miss you at 5, but wish you all the best for the future. I and all my family will be looking out for you. Thank you so much. Val. I expect John prays on the hour to the pips. A popular intermittent interruption to the passage of time. Shh, I hear the pips coming on. Thank you, John Campbell, for your excellent investigative work, integrity and professionalism. We wish you all the best. Vivey and Gemma. First time I've messaged a radio show. Very sad to see you leave, RNZ, John. Listening to your program has been the highlight of my drive home. We're also lucky to have you here. All the very best for your next adventure. We'll be keenly watching. Kia kaha, John from Matthew. And thanks, John, for coming in on your last day when you're crook. Such a pro, and have loved having you on RNZ. All the best, Dave Jackson. And best wishes, John, you'll be sadly missed. No words, excuse me, no words enough for our admiration of your excellent, compassionate journalism. Come back soon. Robin and Warwick. We're hoping to get him back to fill in occasionally for some other things. We'll have some RNZ News headlines now. The government will pay tech entrepreneur Derek Handley $100,000, equal to 3 months' pay and $7,500 of set-up expenses, after it decided it can do his job of technology officer. The Parliamentary Speaker Trevor Mallard says he will not be bullied after an anti-1080 activist threatened to take him to court over his comments that dead native birds laid on the steps at Parliament appear to have been bludgeoned. The Environment Court has reserved until next Friday its decision on whether Auckland Council can drop 1080 poison in the Hunua Ranges. Newly released Stats NZ data reveals more than half of New Zealanders want te reo Māori to be a core subject in primary schools. New Zealand supermarkets say they do not stock the Australian strawberry bands found to have been spiked with needles. Wellington City Council has announced a joint venture with the private firm The Wellington Company to provide 35 apartments in a converted office building in Willis Street. Super Typhoon Mangkhut is already being felt in the northern Philippines, where winds above 300 kilometres an hour are due to hit the island of Luzon tomorrow. And at least one person is dead after a series of gas explosions rocked towns north of Boston in Massachusetts. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Kia ora. This week on Country Life, Mananui Ramsden talks about his role as Cultural Land Management Advisor for Environment Canterbury.